Now I want to turn the presentation over to Ms. Kathy Rivera, again, the Executive Director and CEO of North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center, Dr. Jolie Pataki, Adolescent Psychiatrist, and Marissa Padgett, Psychiatric Social Worker. And they're going to talk about topics related to that transition to high school.
So thank you, Lori. It's a real honor to be here. We want to thank Schreiber High School, especially for having us and giving us this opportunity to connect not only with the school, but actually with the community as well, and really, hearing from them in terms of what they need and what they see. I did notice that there was a question in the chat already. So we are going to go through the presentation and then give some time for some Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A and chat feature at the bottom of the screen so we can make sure that we get to that and answer any questions that you may have that we may not have covered in the presentation. So I just want to sort of, just level set this conversation by saying, we are all struggling to find balance in an unbalanced world. And this layer of this transition that we're talking about tonight, the transition from middle school to high school, the 9th grade class, the return to in-person learning has just really made that more complex. But I will say, in true Schreiber High School fashion, you will, parents and students, all rise to this occasion, and you'll rise to the challenge. So tonight, when we're talking about this transition, I do understand that some students are participating and some parents, many parents. We want you to understand that we'd like to talk a little bit about this transition and what it means from the student's perspective, but more importantly, how parents can support you, the student, in this process. And this is really important too. Enjoy the ride. It's important that you have to have fun and remember those moments to be silly. There's so few of those as you transition to adulthood. Now's the time to package it. So I'd like to give a little bit of an overview of who we are, and then just give you a little bit more detail about the subject matter experts in the room, Dr. Pataki and Marissa Padgett. So the Guidance Center it's North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center. We're also known as the Guidance Center for short. We've been servicing the Nassau community as the lead provider in mental health children's services for over 70 years. 2023 will be celebrating our 70th year. Our mission is to restore and strengthen the emotional well-being of children and families ages 0 to 24. We do have 3 offices. They are in Manhasset, Westbury, and Roslyn, but we serve all of Nassau community. We have a very wide array of services. They include outpatient mental health. We do it all. We do individual, we do group, we do family, we do it in person, we do it virtual. Based on the need, we make sure that you get the services that you need when you need it at the most critical time. We do community-based mental health services as well. We have a drug and alcohol program. We do have specialty programs, a Latina girls program, suicide prevention, emergency triage, maternal depression, grandparents program, a respite program. I could spend all day on this. So we will give you that information at the end of this to access it and learn a little bit more about who we are. What I really want you all to also understand is that we turn no one away for their inability to pay, because we are committed to ensuring that everyone has equity and access to what they need. So I am Kathy Rivera, the CEO and new executive director. So if anyone knows about transitions, I do. I've only been here for 3 months, and I'm the newest member of this family. I am actually now a part of a family that treats families. That's what we are known for as the Guidance Center. I am a licensed clinical social worker by profession. I earned my degree from Hunter. I've actually worked in nonprofit for 26 years, the last 15 years with a specific focus on children and families. And I'm really honored to be part of this organization and to be here with you tonight. Dr. Jolie Pataki is our adolescent psychiatrist, and she is a Schreiber mom survivor. I use the word survivor because parenting is tough. Students, give us a break. We don't get a manual when we have kids, and it's not a one size fits all. So cut us a little bit of slack. Dr. Pataki did her psychiatry residency at SUNY Stony Brook University Hospital. She also did a fellowship in the integration of psychotherapy and psychopharmacology at LIJ Zucker Hillside Hospital. We have been very fortunate to have Dr. Pataki as a member of our team for the last almost 20 years. She has been treating adolescents with the Guidance Center since 2002. She's also earned certification in perinatal mental health from the Postpartum Support International. And she actually also provides care for women with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders at our Nancy Marks Right from the Start Center in Manhasset. Marissa Padgett is our outstanding psychiatric social worker that has been with the agency for a little over 3 years. She actually works with the adolescents ages 11 and up in individual, family, and group settings. Marissa received her Master of Social Work degree in Adelphi in 2016 and has worked as a clinician with all age groups before focusing specifically on adolescents at the Guidance Center. She is currently a clinician in the emergency triage and suicide prevention program and has supported many families in crisis. Marissa actually also runs a therapeutic parent group to help support and educate parents of youth who are in treatment at our organization. So we're going to answer some questions, but one for a set of questions geared toward students and a set of questions geared toward parents. So we are going to start this off with, I will gear this question to Dr. Pataki. So before I go into the question, I just wanted to remind the group that growth and change is a natural part of life, and it's just not always easy to navigate through these changes. So Dr. Pataki, can you answer for us, what is a transition and what can youth expect during this transition, developmentally, emotionally, cognitively? Don't leave any of the good stuff out.
All right. So transition, what is it? Well, we all know it means a change or moving on. This is stressful, especially when there is unknown. The human imagination often blows things out of proportion. So moving on from middle school to high school, what is it that will change? Well, the institution, the physical building, the rules, some more in some areas, some less in other areas. The teachers, they will make greater demands, more expectations, and more volume of work. The student, well, the student will be a lot more anxious. And the parents will be a lot more confused, but all of this is to be expected. So on getting to high school, the likelihood is that you've already heard the new rules and regulations ad nauseum, but rules can be questioned and discussed. In the end, though, you'll probably have to follow most of them. So welcome to adolescence, the biggest developmental change in any human being since the first year of their life. Let's face it, you are going to go through some adjustments. Your brain, yes, you all have one, goes through all sorts of physical modifications. These lead to urges to try new things, yet not quite the patience and forethought to look before you leap. The good news is that your brain gains the capacity for abstract thought, expanding of new ideas, new interests, and eventually catches on that current behaviors have future consequences. And by the way, many of the decisions you make and the preferences you have today may be quite different than the ones you would choose tomorrow. Just by virtue of exposure to new things around you, not to mention the internal changes, which include sexuality. This is a touchy subject, well, pun intended, but it's a serious topic. Early adolescence is a time of self-exploration. It's also a time when you need guidance and accurate information. While the internet is a great source for just about anything, it's not always the most accurate source. Your generation is very savvy with electronic communication, but nothing beats finding a responsible adult to help sort things out that the net really can't convey. These may not be topics that teens are comfortable in discussing with parents, but there should be someone available to seek out and confide in, as sex is a natural part of life as one becomes of age. Maybe your go-to person is your pediatrician, maybe an aunt, an older sibling or cousin. Sometimes it can be a trusted teacher, a school guidance counselor, or a school social worker. So what about the teachers? Believe it or not, they really want you to succeed. This includes not only education in their subject, but other aspects of teenage function. They are the first line, whom you go to with concerns of learning and perhaps with other areas that you might not feel able to confide in your parents. Teachers know how to access additional support, which is a segue to dealing with complicated problems arising from school or even outside of school. Friends are great. In fact, they often seem to give better advice than your parents. But it's really important to find an adult to confide in, to get a perspective from someone who's likely been there, done that, to get their perspective. And sometimes an issue really is too much for a peer to handle. This is especially true if there are concerns for personal health and safety. Well, what about parents? They become more like spectators as their teen fights tooth and nail for independence. One day they're trying to be independent, and the next day they regress to a previous childlike behavior. But then again, parents are still responsible for you. And in my experience, try hard to understand and make great efforts to point you in the right direction. There are, of course, many universal issues to contend with, but the reality is that the environment your child is growing up in is very different than the one you grew up in. So try to keep the communication. Some of it sinks in, even if they don't admit it till they're 40. The key here is not only to be able to listen to what your teen is expressing, but to hear it as well.
Thank you, Dr. Pataki. So I'm actually going to pivot to Marissa, right? And before I go into another question, just to sort of, divulge and level set again, trying to establish stability in an ever-changing world, especially during a pandemic, almost sounds like an oxymoron. Stability, ever-changing, pandemic, right? They just sort of don't go together. And, as a mother myself, right, of two adult children, I didn't even know until someone told me that I was a helicopter mom, right? Often valuing academics over creativity and socialization, often saying, you'll always have time for that. You'll always have time for your friends. You'll always have time for social media, but I need you to worry about college right now. I need you to worry about the future right now. And as we've seen with this pandemic, the future has taken on a very different definition right now. The fact that we are saying to our young people, worry about the future, but you know what, it's kind of unsafe, right? And so, the way they've even, envisioned it has been altered. The struggles with trust and letting go, really got jaded and colored, right, by setting my higher standards for my kids. So I had to learn a lot myself as a parent. So Marissa, if you can just share with some of our parents, what can they expect during this transition?
Okay, so some of this is going to be a little bit similar to what Dr. Pataki mentioned, but as a social worker, I'm looking at not just the psychology and the psychological development or the biological, but also kind of socially what's going on for them, what kinds of new pressures they may feel, and specifically related to the transition from like middle school into high school. One of the changes that your children are definitely going to face is that, I think Dr. Pataki did touch on this a little bit, is that their expectations of them are higher. So we call these the years that quote unquote count, right? As opposed to middle school and elementary school. And what I'm saying, but what I mean by they count is that your kids know that these grades that they get in high school are now what colleges are going to be looking at. So there's a lot more pressure on them than they felt previously. And plus, as you might hear from your kids talking through them as they struggle through their homework sometimes, every year the work gets more and more difficult and the workload gets more demanding than they have experienced in the past. So one thing is that they may struggle to adjust to this. So be aware of that. And when speaking of college, they're facing the pressure to think about their future, to figure out their career, what kind of college they want to go to, what they want to major in. And a lot of teens struggle with this actually. So when you're thinking about that, think about how many of us actually knew exactly what we were going to do with the rest of our lives at age 14. Okay, so that can give you kind of an understanding of where they are and where they're coming from. And also going into the new environment. I think this is, again, something Dr. Pataki mentioned. This is a brand new building for them. It's a bigger building. They need time to learn where everything is. They need to not only navigate the school building, but also their new schedule. I think Lori mentioned that the high school schedule is much different from their middle school schedule. They're meeting new teachers for the very first time, and there's new peers. There's new peers there. There's upperclassmen. And they're having more opportunities for interactions with older peers, if it's in certain classes or in clubs, activities, sports, things like that. And remember that even just seeing them in the hallway, because they're the youngest in the school again in 9th grade. They're just coming from 8th grade where they were the oldest and they were the biggest. And this could be intimidating for them. And sometimes with the interactions with the older kids, there's possible peer pressure. They could feel the need to like fit in or to be popular. They may want to impress these older kids that they see. They may want to try to act older or be cooler. And sometimes that might actually mean misbehaving. So they could be faced with choices that they have not previously encountered in elementary or middle school. And these choices could have more significant consequences than some of the decisions that they've had to make before this. Just a note to parents, friends might seem to be more important than family right now. I know that's hard to hear, but they're going to want to spend more time with them. And that could be just difficult for parents to accept. But I want you to know that this is part of their development. And social challenges are a big issue for them. Social problems such as hearing gossip and rumors, that can be devastating to a child. How they're viewed socially and their social status has a really big impact on them. They have a big fear of embarrassment and they have a need to save face. And also, finally, biologically, what's going on with them? How does that affect them emotionally and socially and everything else? So the hormonal changes that they're experiencing right now make their emotions much more intense. Everything is more exaggerated than it has been before. So there could be notable shifts of ups and downs in their moods. And they might be exploring, like Dr. Pataki mentioned, you know, dating or crushes, and everything is intensified at this age. So ending a romantic relationship or finding out that you're interested in someone that isn't interested in you, that's going to hurt a lot more than we may realize as adults. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind too.
Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate that. Some good advice. So we're going to pivot back to Dr. Pataki, right? You know, Dr. Pataki and to the group, you know, I worked on a campaign previously called Healthy Minds, Healthy Kids. And the focus of that notion was that if there's a strong foundation with your mental health and well-being, the other physical parts of your body function optimally, right? And so, you know, really understanding even things like that, the science behind food and mood. I often get hangry, as they say. The dynamic interplay of nutrition and behavioral health, especially for school-age children, especially for those who are transitioning to adulthood, is really key. You know, our children are living in a very fragmented world, and it's really created an age of anxiety. So I was very happy to see that Vanessa will be touching upon stress management in the curriculum. You know, I've worked with families and children and talked a lot about box breathing and the 4-7-8 breathing technique to manage your own anxiety and keep your thoughts sort of, you know, in control. So Dr. Pataki, what are some recommendations that you have for youth that to help them manage through these transitions, especially during this first year?
Well, I think it's very important to try to figure out what the roadblocks are going to be. So it's not just adjusting to the venerable Schreiber High School, where 3 of my 4 children went, but going through the rest of adolescence is such a big transformation. As we mentioned, parents go from pretty much total control in just about every aspect of a student's life to evolving slowly but surely into the young adult assuming responsibility for themselves, including activities of daily living and basic health. So what do we expect in this process? Well, probably lots of fights, but don't despair. You can consider these learning opportunities. Emotions really do need to be expressed. That's really good. Embedded in these is often real issues that do need to be explored. So what could these be? Well, the only way to know is to explore it. Yes, you actually need to talk. Calmly is best, but not always possible. The point is to try and then try again. You might need to reach out to professional, sometimes just to have some objective assessment and input. Symptoms may actually first emerge or start to bloom in early high school. For example, learning disabilities, ADHD, behavioral problems, various anxieties, including eating disorders, and mood fluctuations that interfere with general functioning. The key is, do these things interfere with a student's functioning, and to what degree? Of course, school can be intimidating, and sometimes the discomfort gets so great that a student does not want to go. There are various reasons, and that's fine if it happens once in a while. But if it becomes a regular thing, a habit, avoiding class, going to the nurse or guidance office, calling home and asking parents to pick them up all the time, that really does need to be explored. Maybe it could be an easily resolved situation, or it could be a serious one, such as bullying. This is another important subject. Bullying can occur in many ways, all of them unacceptable. If a student feels mistreated, it needs to be brought to the attention of an adult. Schools have an obligation to respond quickly and effectively to protect all students, even when the problem extends off campus. It's not ratting someone out by disclosing knowledge of some kind of mistreatment. It's actually a component of good citizenship, a part of being a responsible adult. Sometimes students just need basic support to deal with stress. Healthy living goes a long way, like sleep, get some. And not just because your mother tells you, like mine did. Adequate rest really does significantly impact on well-being, mood, and intellectual functioning. Insomnia can be a big problem. There are important sleep hygiene habits that are actually quite effective and really good importance. Sometimes academics are so demanding that there actually aren't enough hours in the day for all of it. AP classes are great for many reasons, but let's not overdo it. Overdoing it might be like taking 7 at a time, which is likely to become counterproductive. After all, the average college student only takes 4 or 5. So some take-home points. It's really hard to raise parents these days, so be kind to them. As tumultuous as these next few years are, most of what you will go through is a normal evolution from teen to young adult. If you don't have a sense of humor, try hard to find one. It will really help through the ups and downs. Most of your trials and tribulations are not the end of the world, despite the intense feelings you may have at the time. Someday you'll look back and laugh, provided you've retained that sense of humor. And if things start to feel out of control, we are available to evaluate, advise, support, treat, and otherwise commiserate with struggling youngsters and their families.
Thank you, Dr. Pataki. So we'll do one last question, and then we'll start looking at some of the questions that have been placed in the chat. And I'll go back to Marissa. So Marissa, before I ask, I just want to remind the group that, as parents, as adults, we know better than anyone else that we live in a fast-paced competitive environment, right? We know that. We're living it right now. But we really need to remember that self-care and a healthy mindset is just not a nice to have, but it really is a need to have in order to not only get through life, but honestly survive life, in the midst of a pandemic, especially. As a parent, I always needed constant reminders that I had to give grace to make mistakes. And as parents, you need to remember that this first year, it's not about if, it's about when they make mistakes, and to be able to give them that permission to do so. This is their first year. They are adapting. As a gentle reminder, healthy conflicts are a part of family life. That is not something that is unnatural. And then as individuals, we all need to remember to seek joy whenever we can. So Marissa, what are some recommendations that you can make to parents on how best to address these changes and or meet some of their child's needs during this really critical shift?
Okay, so I have a few things to go over. One of the things to be aware of from like a social emotional developmental stage is that right now teens are looking for increased independence. They want to know why certain rules are in place. They don't want to just follow them without knowing that. So if you remember back when they were little and you asked them to do something or you were enforcing a rule and they would come and say, why? And you could give them the answer, well, it's because I said so, or it's because I'm your mom, because I'm your dad, you know, and that was enough. Now it might be a little bit more difficult because now they're looking for more of an explanation from you. And honestly, it's okay for them to want to know. You can explain, so there's an increased understanding from them. You shifting the paradigm from control to collaboration, where you're not just an authoritative figure anymore, you're somebody who is on their side and in their corner. They want to feel respected. They're not yet adults, but they are becoming autonomous individuals. They're having their own ideas, values, and interests. So include them in the rulemaking process, as well as with deciding what the consequences and rewards of certain behaviors are. Understand also, as I mentioned before a little bit, that there's going to be shifts in moods and behaviors, and that can be part of the developmental process. But it can also be a sign that they're trying to cope with increased stressors. And this is important. Try not to take emotional outbursts personally. This may be a sign that they're having some difficulty managing the stress that they're confronting. Instead, try to find out where it could be coming from. I always teach parents to listen to what, not only what their teen is saying, but also what are they feeling? That's empathetic communication. What's the meaning behind their anger or the irritability? What else happened to them during their day? Did they fail a test? Did they have a fight with a friend? Did someone make fun of them? Did a teacher get them in trouble for something that they feel they didn't do? You know, there could be a reason by it. And a lot of times, sometimes their anger and irritability could be masking that, okay? That could be just how they're dealing with it. So be supportive and encourage an open dialogue. Be to them an open door. Let them know that it's better to discuss problems than to hide or to lie about them. They may not want to tell you about their low grades, their missing assignments, or if they got into trouble in school because they're afraid that you might be angry with them. So encourage them to talk through problems instead of going right to punishments. If they fear that they will be invalidated or not heard, then they'll be less likely to come to you for solutions. And remember too, teens have not fully developed their decision-making skills. So if they make a mistake, this can be a valuable time when you can work on this with them. I think we used to call them teachable moments. So talk to your teens about some difficult choices they may be faced with, and it'll be better coming from you than coming from someone else. You can balance the setting of limits, such as, you know, when your schoolwork's done, then you can have free time. But make sure you follow through with the consequences as well as whatever the rewards are. Even though they're looking for dependence, they also still need limits because that helps them to feel safe. There's so much that they're adjusting to right now as the world keeps changing. And during this transition, it's important to be consistent so they at least know what to expect from you. Allow for the increase in socialization. It's important, like I said before, to their development at this time. They're trying to separate from you a little bit, and that is also part of their development. It doesn't mean that they love you less or that they don't respect you. It's just part of them figuring out who they are in this world. And finally, allow for relaxation and time for self-care, as Kathy mentioned, reflection, and make it a part of their day. Encourage them to explore their interests. What do they like to do to relax? They do not have to be fully engaged all day long. Their brains are so filled with information most of the day that sometimes they need to unplug. So I like to talk to kids about doing things like either playing or listening to music, doing art, even just watching videos or shows, just having some downtime. They need this. And honestly, so do you. In my parent group, and when I work with my families, I always encourage self-care. Because if you're stressed, this can also affect your teen. They do pick up on the emotions of people close to them. And also don't forget to reach out to supports either in your family, like extended family members, your community, your school, or elsewhere if you feel that you or your teen need extra help with any of these transitions. Because remember, like the old saying goes, it takes a village. So use your village.
Thank you, Marissa. So Lori, I don't know if you want to sort of help me maybe look through the chat. I wasn't sure if some of these were geared toward us, or I don't see anything in the Q&A.
So I have something, I think a good topic. I'm going to encourage anybody that wants to, anyone that has a question, please use the Q&A. All attendees are muted right now, so the Q&A is the way to go. We will monitor that. I do have something in the chat which I think is quite relevant and important at this age. So just advice and tips on how to navigate changing friendship dynamics.
That's all you, Dr. Pataki or Marissa. Go for either one.
Sometimes that can be a difficult one. That's a tough one, changing friendship dynamics. So what I have a lot of kids do, and this can be hard for them to realize, is to recognize whether or not the friendship is really benefiting them. To recognize how that friendship, how that friend is treating them, how they're making them feel. And I try to help them to steer away from things that really aren't feeling too good anymore. Because if your child, as every child, is deserving of respect and a loving, caring environment, and if those friends that they have are not providing that they're not supportive, then and this is hard. Be supportive to your teen that may be going through this. Because like I was mentioning in the presentation, the friendships are very, very important. Like they're their whole world right now. So being supportive and asking them, well, how does that really make you feel? And if it's not making them feel very good, then maybe it's time to break away. I don't know, Dr. Pataki, if you wanted to add to that.
I would just add that a lot of times, even if a teen recognizes that something can be counterproductive, it's still really hard for them to make that transition. I think that's a very painful, laborious process that you need to review with them. It's like, well, the last time you did this or they did that, it was very difficult, but you're going to have to kind of expect that they're not going to usually let it go and say, yeah, you're right, I'm moving on, because there's too much emotion already invested. So this is going to have to be a supportive process. Perhaps you can try to get them interested in other things or encourage connecting with other people. That's perhaps a positive thing to try to get them distracted. But this is a long process, and it's not something that any one of us has any easy answers to.
Thank you for that. I do have a question in the chat box that I will read out. A parent would like to know, what is a good strategy for my son to relax and take his downtime? Because he currently only uses his phone, and that is pretty annoying to me, and I would like to help him find better alternatives.
Well, I think it's important to try to explore any other hobbies or interests he might have. If he doesn't have any of that, maybe he would be willing to join in with some of your interests or some of his siblings' interests. I think it's important to try multiple different possibilities, because as we know nowadays, everything about these kids' lives is centered around their electronics. Any kind of activity, especially a physical activity, like any kind of sport, maybe they can join something from school. Maybe there's a new club there. Maybe there's a new kind of sport that they never tried. Maybe you can even get them lessons to get them up to speed so they can be really good at something. Something like maybe tennis or something that they might be willing to try if they have not done that before. So I would say try to focus on whatever kind of new hobby first, and then say, well, you know, you've been on your phone so much. How about if we go out and practice whatever we've started to learn? So that too, I think, is going to have to be a gradual process, because as I said, these electronics, it's like a peripheral brain for them. It does not easily separate.
Yeah, I would agree to that. Dr. Pataki, as a parent, I think one of the things that's hard to recognize, though we know this, is that, as parents, I know we're all of different ages, but we're tech immigrants, so to speak, and our children are tech natives, right? So they've grown up with this, and this is sort of their lifestyle. And so it's that balancing act of recognizing that, this is sort of, what they've been used to. And I think even one of the family members even said, you're talking about 18 months of hybrid learning. And then to say, stop looking at a device when we just spent the last 18 months saying, don't go anywhere and stare at a device. It's hard, right? We're talking about transitions tonight, just up to the 9th grade. Talk about transitions of a lifestyle and sort of relearning how to connect, how to have a conversation. Even us as panelists, we had to be comfortable talking to a screen and being comfortable with that silence. It's a skill and it takes real time. So please have patience with it, reach out. I think to Dr. Pataki's point, don't just try it once and say, oh, that didn't work. Something's wrong. Repetition, adult learning especially takes multiple times and experiencing it over and over.
So we have two in the Q&A. I'm going to start with answering one, and if anybody wants to chime in. But we have one question here. 18 months of COVID-induced hybrid learning in small pods, which was the model at Weber Middle School for most of the year, has resulted in social isolation and lost friendships the entire second half of middle school. Will you be addressing with the kids how to re-engage old friends and developing new relationships? Schreiber is so big, they may not see many of the old friends. So I do think the panelists have answered some of that. I also would say that in the health curriculum in 9th grade, they do address relationships. But I also think too, this is something that I can also pass along to Ms. Garcia. I think awareness to this issue is important. The students do have, with the block schedule, there is time available during the day, and for students to re-engage socially for those that were isolated is very important. So this is an important topic for us to talk about. So I'll turn it over if anybody wants to add something.
I think at Schreiber, there's so many different clubs available, and there's so much to do for everyone. I think that it's also time to make new friendships. Things are always changing, so they can always reconnect with their old friends in certain 9th grade classes, like health, for example, and they could also meet new friends in their sports or any clubs that they decide to join.
I just want to add to that as well that there are a lot of opportunities, as Ms. Director mentioned, with free time in our block scheduling, the clubs, the activities. Students do have a lot of social time. One of the issues that some of them may be experiencing is a little bit of hesitancy toward re-engaging with peers. And so that is definitely something that we can work on addressing with Ms. Garcia in her program. And also with guidance counselors. And that's one of those reasons where getting to know the guidance counselor is so essential. Having those conversations, having someone to talk to about that, as much as we as parents often want our children to come to us, sometimes we're not the best person to help them through that particular situation because, school is more of a social situation. And so having that adult to talk to in school can be really helpful.
I would also like to maybe just quickly mention that during COVID, everybody had no choice but to be isolated. But, what about having the kid invite a bunch of friends over and hanging out in the backyard or even in the house now? A lot of people are vaccinated, and we kind of know some basics about masks and social distancing. Maybe we need to encourage our kids. Okay, guys, you can now come out and play, and encourage them. You know what? Call 3 or 4 friends. Have them come over to our house. I'll order a pizza. Little bits and pieces like that, I think can encourage socialization in a safe and hopefully non-electronic situation.
We had one other Q&A here. I think this was in the chat as well. Yes, I did respond in terms of the importance of having an assembly about digital citizenship. I agree. It is important to continue to remind the students. And again, this is something that they do go over in the health curriculum. However, we can never say too much about safety and the internet. I do not know at this time if there are plans, but it is something that I will bring back to the team and keep in mind for the future. Again, it's something that the counselors can discuss with the students, the teachers. It is involved. It is a topic that comes up quite frequently. But if you have concerns specifically, please do reach out to your counselor. Do we have any additional questions? Oh, I see something in here. Okay. So what if your kids do not play sports? Again, that the club fair that we had, and if your child wasn't able to make it down there, there is a list on the website. And I would say, again, we can, they can talk to their counselor about the different opportunities for clubs. There are academic clubs, there are social clubs, there are different clubs based on different interests. So I really do believe there's something for everybody. And so, yes, I understand that if your child is not involved in sports, it may seem like the options are may not be there, but there are options there. So I would encourage your student or children to speak to their counselor. One other question, there has been a lot of news of late about the downsides to certain social media platforms like Instagram for teens and TikTok. We could say no and deal. If we say yes, it's increasingly difficult to remain vigilant and keep them safe. Agreed. Absolutely agreed. This is not an easy thing for parents and students to navigate. I think Dr. Pataki said it best. It's not easy raising parents these days. I know that both Dr. Pataki and Ms. Padgett talked about limits and rewards. And I think, again, it speaks to the conversations and having an open dialogue with your students about this, and kind of knowing when our parental instinct kicks in and says, okay, it's time, enough is enough. Mm-hmm. And my children are a little bit older. They're young adults. One's in college, one is 23. They still like me. Even though I've set some limits, I certainly can't say that I am the perfect parent. I don't think that exists. We kind of bump along even to this day on certain topics. But even when I had to set a limit, they're still magically speaking to me. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's like I was saying before in the presentation that believe it or not, kids are looking for limits. As much as they want their freedom and they want their independence, which that's fine, and they can kind of have that and test that a little bit, and that's good sometimes, like having their own values, their own interests, their own ideologies, things like that, and spending more time with their friends. But they are looking for some kind of limit, and it helps them to feel safe in a way, actually. So as far as like your concerns about the technology is that, if like Lori was saying, use your judgment. If you feel like it's getting to be too much, if they're missing sleep, if they're not participating in other activities because of it, or if you're worried about the content that they're viewing, then definitely, most definitely set a time frame for it. I have some kids that have like trouble with focus, like ADHD or anxiety and stuff, and they have trouble completing their homework. Why? Because their phone's right next to them. Well, then what's the issue? Put your phone in a different room, plug it in and charge it for a little while on a different floor of the house. These are all things that they can do where they don't have to be attached to it. The problem is that with social media, kids are never disconnected, right? You remember when we were young and like you hang up the phone or you stop hanging out with somebody and that was kind of it for the night? That's not the case for them. They have this big called fear of missing out, right? That if I put my phone away, I'm not going to know what's going on in the group chat and I'm going to be lost tomorrow socially. So letting them know that it's okay to disconnect sometimes, and it might actually be healthy to disconnect, but that has to come from you and from setting those limits.
Do we have any others? I don't see any other open questions. I think we've covered a lot of topics this evening. I really enjoyed hearing from all of you. I can't thank you enough for your words of advice, your reassurance. I feel better. I feel like we're all in this together. And I really just appreciate having you all from North Shore Child and Family Guidance as our partners in this presentation. Thank you, parents and families and students for joining us this evening. I think we've answered all of the questions. So I just want to again, thank everybody and have a wonderful evening. Thank you all.
Yeah, Lori, if I could just say, just if you could share our information, because if anyone needs our services and needs to reach out, we are more than happy. We are here for the community. We serve all of Nassau. Please, it's, we're all in this together.
Absolutely. I will be sure to send that out to everybody once. So parents, students, I will share this out tomorrow via email. So just look for that, and it will also be posted to the website. Included, I will have the information from the team at North Shore. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.